Hey there, Agile Ninjas, and I guess it's actually technically Ninja. Hey there, Agile Ninja, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner, day in and day out. The title of today's podcast is Don't Listen to Me, and if I'd had more foresight, I probably would have made this our year-long anniversary podcast. You might remember me talking an episode or two ago about how we've been at this a year. But I didn't have that kind of foresight. So what you can do is just pick a couple of my past episodes that you didn't like very well and just pretend like they never happened. Just delete them from your memory. And this can just be episode 52. Or maybe there's a couple you haven't heard yet. For instance, you probably haven't listened to the holiday podcast from last year, which is my favorite episode. So you can just kind of write those out of the canon, and this can be the official annual end of the year anniversary podcast for Agile Bytes if you want to. But today's podcast is about authorities in the Agile community and should we listen to them and what is their value. So I'll tell you a little story about me and Mike Cohn. This is not meant to be a criticism of Mike Cohn. So if you really like Mike Cohn or you are Mike Cohn, I'm not going to be saying anything mean about him/you, but this was an important part of my Agile trajectory, so I'm going to talk about it. So my journey in agility actually started with XP in the early 2000s. And, I never really was formally trained in XP. It was mostly by following the main exponents, Ron Jeffries in particular. I would follow him on Twitter and we would chit chat. And books, of course, articles, different things that I could read about XP, and just really was rocked by the whole concept of things like user stories and iterative development and things like that, things that were good, strong bones. I've noticed that as of late, there's been kind of a renaissance in sort of rediscovering XP. And I'm really happy about that because whether you adopt XP wholesale or not, so many good ideas are in XP, so many sound principles, just core, agile, non-political, non-frameworky, commercialized stuff that is just really good and will really enhance your use of those ideas and practices, even though you may end up doing other frameworks or none at all. Anyway, that was kind of my exposure. But my first sort of formal training or professional Agile career, I guess, was when I was working for KeyBank and we decided to go Agile and we all became Scrum Masters. This was very easy to do at the time because at the time, all you had to do to become a certified Scrum Master was sit in certified Scrum Master training for 2 days and, participate somewhat. That was literally it. There's no exam. There was no, minimum amount of work experience or anything like that. You sat in the room for 2 days while someone talked to you. Maybe you did an exercise or something like that. And then bada boom, bada bang, you are now a certified Scrum Master. And there is a lot to criticize maybe about that way of raising a crop of certified Scrum Masters. But from a marketing perspective, this is gold. I mean, Scrum is a behemoth now because at least in the beginning, Scrum certifications were just sown like seeds. It was just very easy to get one at the time. But I did learn about Scrum, or I should say I learned about the practices of Scrum. And this is, of course, old versions of the Scrum Guide that are much more prescriptive than the Scrum Guide is today. I learned all those practices and procedures, but none of us had ever done them before. And none of us really knew what good Scrum was supposed to look like. Honestly, none of us knew what bad Scrum was supposed to look like. We had no frame of reference for it whatsoever, just the things we had been taught in the class about the practices. Like we knew we were supposed to have a daily stand-up, but we didn't know what exactly they were supposed to accomplish or what a good one looked like. We just kind of learned the 3 questions, what did you do today? What did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And, are you having any roadblocks? Do you need any help? Same with retrospective, same with sprint planning. There was a lot of, hey, do these things, but we were all unclear why or what a good version of those things looked like. So we were just doing stuff. We were just kind of trying to do the processes, having discussions, debates. I don't know that it went super well. I think that probably the highest value of that time was it sort of prompted us all to really study agility a little more intensely and get a better grip on it. But during this time, in sort of Agile's spread, I guess, there were a lot of people in a similar boat. A lot of Scrum Masters being churned out that just sat in 2 days worth of training on this thing that they knew nothing about, that they hadn't really seen. And even most trainers didn't have a super strong grasp on the theory behind a lot of the Scrum practices and couldn't communicate those things. A lot of times they had personal practices that they would teach in the class that were not part of Scrum, but they were presented indiscriminately from the rest of Scrum. And so, you sort of learned a version of Scrum from your instructor that may or may not have been Scrum at all. And a lot of people were in this boat where we were learning, you're supposed to do all these Agile things. This is the Agile way to do these things, but we don't know what those things look like. We had a lot of questions and not a lot of answers. And we knew we were supposed to do the things, but we didn't know how. Into this space entered people like Mike Cohn, who is probably almost single-handedly responsible for the contemporary use of user stories in Scrum. And he wrote books on Agile estimation and many other books about the things that he did that fit into a Scrum framework. And the public just ate these books up. In a very short amount of time, he became a Scrum celebrity, a Scrum thought leader. Mountain Goat Software produced, I believe at the time, actual planning poker cards that you could buy and use in your sprint planning, because that was how they did sprint planning. And what he was doing is he was laying out, here's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do sprint planning. Here's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to take these cards. You're supposed to talk about user stories. You're supposed to hold them up. And, he offered an island of certainty in a storm of uncertainty, and people ate it up. It didn't matter if his ideas were good or his ideas were bad, or if they facilitated agility or they impeded agility. None of that mattered. The only thing that really mattered was none of us know what we're doing, but this guy seems like he does. He's going to tell me how to do sprint planning. He's going to tell me how to do a daily stand-up. He's going to tell me how to do story points. And we'll just do that. And when you are feeling uncertain, the idea of like a recipe book, do these steps and then agility will magically emerge out the other side, or at least some comprehensible version of Scrum will emerge. That's very attractive. I'll just go on the record as saying I don't agree with Mike Cohn about almost anything, really. And that doesn't mean he isn't smart, and that doesn't mean he isn't a good developer or that he's not agile. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying I disagree with him about almost everything. And at the time, I just wasn't thinking critically about it, and neither was anyone else. And so you begin to have these voices kind of fill in the gaps. The uncertainty created a craving for authority, the need for a savior, right? And as people began to speak authoritatively into that space, they became those saviors. They became those authorities, not necessarily because their ideas were strong, but just because people needed something to hold on to. And there were plenty of people who stepped up into that space. I'm kind of picking on Mike Cohn because he was the earliest to show up, kind of in my own experience, but it's not just him. We can probably all think of big names in the Agile community, many of whom are still luminaries today, whose claim to fame was not so much that they revolutionized everyone's success in agility, but rather they provided concrete things in a world where things were not very concrete. They provided structure and answers and certainty in a space where we didn't feel very certain. Why do we crave those things? Why is it that when we learn about things like retrospectives or user stories or anything that people may have found helpful in their journey to increase agility, why do we want someone to tell us how to do it? Why do we want someone to give us something concrete that we can follow? You think about even the Agile Manifesto. The Agile Manifesto is a set of things we value over other things, for God's sake. I mean, it tells you how to do nothing. It literally tells you how to do nothing. Why, when confronted with that, do we want someone to tell us, what does this look like? What are we supposed to do with these values? What are we supposed to do with these principles? Tell us the concrete things to perform. And I think the reason that we feel that way is because when we feel uncertainty, we crave certainty. We crave the concrete when things are ambiguous. And the main reason is really fear, right? We are afraid we're going to do the wrong thing. We are going to screw it up and we're going to experience pain or failure because somebody smarter than us or wiser than us or with more experience than us didn't tell us what to do. And if we just had that person with all the answers to tell us what to do, we could just do those things and be confident that victory would be ours, right? That we would avoid pain, we would avoid failure, and our career would just be an unending stream of success and everyone would love us and life would be comfortable and on and on and on. The problem with that is that way of thinking itself is antithetical to Agile because Agile arose because of the uncertainties inherent in software development projects. Not all of them, certainly, but many software development projects have a lot of uncertainty about them. We don't really know how all of this is going to shake out. And the more concrete answers you try to get before you start, you're really just kind of wasting time or maybe even setting yourself up for failure. We know that past a certain point, the more concrete details we accumulate before doing the work are all going to be wrong. And we will have wasted that time. We will have wasted that money. We may even be headed in the wrong direction because we had concrete results too early. In an Agile environment, how do we deal with uncertainty? Through tiny experiments, right? You do small experiments, you get feedback, you see what happens, you analyze the impact, and then you make a decision. Do we lean more heavily in this direction? Do we pivot? Do we change? Do we stop? Right? Those are the questions we keep asking ourselves periodically as we crank out these little experiments, examine the results, get feedback, see what happened, and then we adjust. Even if that adjustment is a wholesale, turning 180 degrees. That's how we deal with uncertainty, is not by getting more answers, but through experimentation. Does that mean that we fail sometimes? Yeah, it sure does. Does it mean that sometimes failure is painful? Yes, it does. Does that mean that people who have more experience, who have traveled the road that we are trying to travel, may have valuable things to share with us? Absolutely. I consider myself something of a lean or an agile coach. I love to go to organizations and do workshops and help them look at their own situation and help them think about different things that they might do given their specific context that might work for them, that would make them more agile, more responsive, or in some cases more predictable, or even faster. I love to do those things. But the way I view my role in that process is I'm just someone who has gone down this road myself, who has gone down this road with some other organizations, and I can tell you what the scenery looked like. I can tell you what things we had to sidestep, and I can tell you the lessons we learned. Are those going to be helpful to you? Yes. Will they give you all the answers you need? No. You are the only person. Your team is the only team. Your organization is the only organization that can be an authority on your situation. You are the only authority that you need. The rest of us can give you useful information. We can give you tools. We can give you the benefit of our experience, but your experience is not our experience, right? And it's not wise to ignore all that, but it's not wise to take somebody else's journey and try to mimic that journey in exactly the same way, because your context is not the same. Your people are not the same. Your culture is not the same. Your software products are not the same. So don't listen to me. Listen to you. Do your own experiments. Even if you think something that I've said is something you shouldn't be doing, if you think you should do it, try it. See what happens. You might find out that in your context and in your situation, I'm totally wrong. And you know what? I'm great with that. I think that's great because ultimately the goal isn't for me to be right. The goal isn't for me to sell books, although that would be pretty sweet. If I write a book here in the next year, you better buy it. But that's not the goal, right? The goal is not to hire me as an agile coach, although I also like that. The goal is for you to benefit. The goal is for you to become more responsive to your environment, to grow in your ability to deliver value. And that may mean taking what everyone else has said and lighting a big old match to it and just doing what works in your context. Do the experiments, fail, learn. Minimize the size and impact of the experiments so that failure doesn't hurt you so much, and then adapt based on what you see. Just the same way you've been shown to do software projects in an Agile environment. Because ultimately, if you really think about it, I'll bet most of you who listen to this podcast, you probably already know what to do. You just need to go do it. So I encourage you to do that. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.